no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a VTA, we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me, my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me, my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This a we da fear. Nobody give it to no Guatemala. This a me, my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the help on the Belize and dollar because no Guatemala. Follow me now.
And welcome to Sunday Review for this morning, Sunday, April 12th, 2026. I'm Sistah YaYa, Marin Coleman, producer and host of Belize's only news review talk show. We are on local channel XTV, simulcasting on Creme Radio, with a live stream on XTV Belize, Facebook, and YouTube page. We'll be here for the next 90 minutes. Excited. We haven't been on for a little while. Well, at least last week, Easter Sunday, so we never come. But we're back. Hot, dynamic, engaging with co-host Brother Mutota from the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, a revolutionary. And our guest this morning is no stranger to Sunday Review, our Sistah Dr. Tamanisha J. John from York University in Canada. Good morning, Brother Akko. Good morning, Sistah Dr. Tamanisha.
Good morning, Sister YaYa. Good morning to Dr. John. Good morning to our listening audience. Once again, it's good to be on Sunday Review.
I asked Doc, how do you want me to introduce you? And she said, I'm a passionate learner and educator, which is very different from the academics. Then scholars got they want to make a know they got a PhD now, how much book they write on. Yes. So that was different. How are you being this morning, sis?
I am good. I was tired since I got home this morning, but now I'm awake. My spirit is awakened since I'm on here with both two of y'all. Akko, hello, nice to meet you. Sister YaYa, nice to see you again, to see both of you again, and hello to everybody watching or listening.
Give thanks. I'm sure you have your followers tuned in, Sister Doc. Brother Akko, it's all about Caribbean news. We not waste no time. Make we hear this story we got for this week.
Yeah, we have a lot of pieces. I don't know if we'll be able to get through all of them, but we will try to. A lot has happened in the Caribbean since we last met. And this morning we have a number of pieces from Jamaica, Cuba, Guyana, Bahamas, Grenada, Trinidad, Venezuela, St. Vincent. So we begin with the one possibly the most obvious situation in the Caribbean now, what is happening with Cuba, Cuba and the Caribbean relative to the role that the Cuban health professionals play in the Caribbean, and the sort of, and it's not sort of, but the traitorous, what I will call behavior of Caribbean leaders by abandoning Cuba in its hour of need. So the headline this morning deals with that. The headline is Cuba offers a lifeline to the world through its health process, and the Caribbean basically is complicit in the U.S. drive to expel them from the Caribbean. So I'll just read a couple paragraphs and have our good sister, Dr. John, respond. So hold on one second. Cuba's doctors were a lifeline for the world. Now the Caribbean is shamefully complicit in the US drive to expel them. That is a piece in an international paper. This is very important because under pressure from the Trump administration, the Caribbean leaders, most of them have abandoned the Cuban medical program, even though they're beneficial to the people, and expelled Cuban doctors. So the headline begins, for decades, Cuban doctors have served the Caribbean's most marginalized. Now, as Cuba faces its own crisis, the region looks away, waiting on Trump's approval. There is a line, often quoted, seldom practiced, from the Christian Gospels: love thy neighbor as thyself. It is recited from the Americas to Africa, invoked in speeches, embroidered into national mottos. But like many moral injunctions, it has proven easier to proclaim than to live by. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, something extraordinary and shameful is unfolding. Cuban doctors, emissaries of one of the world's most besieged nations, are being expelled from host nations, contracts terminated, health programs dismantled, and in their absence, the poorest will pay in untreated illnesses, unattended births, undiagnosed cancers. The region is in effect amputating its own lifeline under pressure from the US. The tone was set in Trump's first term. In 2018, 8,300 Cuban doctors left Brazil after the country's then president, Bolsonaro, closely aligned with Washington, threatened the program and its payment structure. Since then, the US has pushed countries across the region to terminate these agreements, branding them forced labor and even human trafficking, because the Cuban state retains a share of salaries, conveniently ignoring that these doctors were trained free of charge by the Cuban government, unlike their heavily indebted counterparts in countries such as the UK, where medical graduates have the onerous burden of student debt for decades. The consequences have been enormous. Guatemala, Honduras, Jamaica, the Bahamas, Antigua and Barbuda, Guyana, St. Vincent and the Grenadines have all capitulated. Across the Caribbean and Latin America, programs, some as old as 50 years, are being dismantled, doctors withdrawn, and an already fragile system strained, all under the pressure of US visa and diplomatic sanctions. Only in St. Kitts and Nevis and Trinidad and Tobago have yet to follow. So I'll end here and I'll have our sister comment on this most shameful episode in Caribbean history relative to the leadership and the governments of the time.
Well, yes, I think that it is sort of cowardly, and not just cowardly, but I think a lot of these governments in the Caribbean are staking themselves alongside US imperialism for their own sort of elite interest with visas and things like that. You have a lot of the smaller Eastern Caribbean countries like Grenada and, Antigua and them, for instance, that didn't capitulate to the US in kicking out Cuban doctors. And they're already some of the smallest and, poorest states. And so that's why some of them have now seen sanctions or, light visa sanctions, where the US is telling them that to get visas now, they have to pay 15,000 US dollars to come because they didn't take this aggressive stance against Cuba. And I think that what is being undermined in all of this is sovereignty, but also solidarity itself. And prior to us having this conversation, YaYa was mentioning bell hooks and about love, but solidarity is one of the highest forms of love. And I think that in that, Cuba has shown a lot of love to many Caribbean countries, often sending doctors into states to serve in those regions that the states themselves don't service. And so some of the poorest Jamaicans are going to suffer by Cuban doctors leaving, whereas the politicians and their visas are just going to go to the United States or elsewhere to get their medical care. In Guyana, a lot of the rural communities and indigenous communities will suffer. So again, we're talking about areas that the states and doctors, even within those own countries, don't like to go and do the work. And so to accuse Cuban solidarity or Cuban love for its brother and sister countries as being engaged in forced labor or trafficking because of the US mandate. It's gross because it's not true, but it's also gross because to me it's an expression of hate. Like if someone is giving you love and you're turning your back on them, to me that's like it's just gross. So there are no words for that, really.
Yeah, it's very important that we speak about solidarity in these times. I've often in commenting at forum that I speak at, that this idea that capitalism has implanted in our minds about life, all aspects of life, as a competitive sort of exercise. And, everything is competitive, competitive economics, competitive this and so on. I've always said that I don't know any civilization that was built and sustained on competition. It was built on cooperation. And solidarity is an important expression of cooperation. And so if we are to, even the indigenous communities and societies and civilizations that we came from, they were built on this cooperative, and this spirit of solidarity. It was part of the intrinsic nature of the society. And so what these Caribbean leaders are doing is actually inconsistent with our own traditions as African and Indian people who have built these civilizations based on and our indigenous populations based on solidarity and cooperation. At the heart of these civilizations were the cooperative spirit, And I remember speaking with Brother Yusi Koyana, and he indicated, and I'm sure you may not want me to say this, but I'll share it anyway. He said when he analyzed the situation in Guyana, he was the one who recommended that the term the cooperative republic be named, because he said when you looked at the politics and how the Indians felt isolated, he said the only way to alleviate this feeling of isolation and being left out of the process was to develop in the kind of philosophy of the state a sense of cooperation. And so he recommended that the republic be called the Cooperative Republic of Ghana, which is not being used anymore from what I can see now. So it is very important in this time, especially as what I call hyper-imperialism, right? Because this is a different kind of imperialism in terms of its aggression. That it's very important that these core principles of cooperation and solidarity be an important part of our dialogue and discourse.
Brother Akka, thanks. Sister Tamanisha, thanks. How would both of you define solidarity? The trade unions in Belize, for example, like to sing this song, Solidarity Forever, and I recently said publicly that they need to stop singing that song because they're not living the words of that song. What does solidarity mean to each of you?
For me, solidarity is sort of like talking about the collective power of regular everyday people that are struggling for some collective means or some collective ends. Oftentimes, especially since I'm in Canada, you hear people saying, oh, we have solidarity, but their solidarity is just that they're in a union asking for more wages. They don't care about the fact that their union is supporting murdering people abroad or for any other reason. Or people view solidarity as this very insular thing that belongs to me and whatever group I'm a part of. But no, solidarity is a sort of collective process where you and all of the people that you're in some sort of struggle with, whether it's for better health, as in the case of Cuban doctors, or a better way of life, are actively struggling towards with throughout all segments of your society. And so it's not just confined to who's in a trade union or who's not in a trade union. Solidarity is something extended to the employed and unemployed, the idling people, marginalized people, and oppressed people, because the goal is some vision where we're all collectively at some end of the day fighting for something bigger and better. And I do think that solidarity today has been co-opted and sort of denigrated to be this thing that is very insular and divisive. So when people hear I'm in solidarity with you, it almost doesn't mean anything. So I sometimes even tell people I prefer to say I'm struggling with you in this, because that's what it is. It means that I recognize that we're struggling for this collective thing at the end of the day. And I'm going to express that in my actions, in my work, how I talk, how I'm with you. And so that solidarity, like anti-imperialism and like anti-capitalism, are terms that we have to say, no, you don't get to redefine them to mean this sort of minute thing. Because some people will say, oh, I'm in solidarity with my state not being invaded by the US is why I cut off the Cuban doctors. That's nonsense because the Cuban doctors are supposed to be a part of your solidarity because you recognize them as people engaged in a collective struggle with you.
Thanks, Brother Akko.
So, Sarah, before I answer the question directly, I just want to respond to something. And it refers to language. One of the things that imperialism has done is to appropriate the language of the revolution. So, for example, we used to say power to the people. Now you see Trump clenching his fist. So all the things that we have, the revolutionary movement, developed in its attempt to communicate a different ideas, a different way of life, okay, a different imagination. Imperialism has co-opted it in terms of some of its advertisements. So they talk about the revolution with sneakers, right? And all of these kinds of trivial. So they're reducing a lot of the revolutionary language and rhetoric to trivia. And so things like solidarity, Pan-Africanism, all of these things have been reduced to a kind of trivia and to confuse people because a major factor in sustaining the narrative of capitalism is to create confusion. So they create a lot of confusion using language. But to answer your question directly, to speak of solidarity, so there are solidarities of different forms. We may call it from minor to major. But the best example I can give of solidarity, and which I think to me it was a living example, was what the Cubans did in Angola. When the Cubans sent troops to fight alongside the Angolans in the defeat of apartheid, it was one of the greatest acts of solidarity, right? There were also progressives who, during the Spanish Civil War, they went from different parts of the world to fight on the side of the progressives and the radicals in the Spanish Civil War. During the Ethiopian War against the Italian occupation colonizers, there were people from different parts of the world who went to fight in solidarity with the Ethiopians. So that's my most practical example and what you may call a demonstrative effect of what solidarity was. It is not just talk. It's not just putting your fist up and doing a march. There comes a point when you have to match concrete, action. And that is what solidarity is. To me, it is deed. It is the willingness to be on the front line in the face of danger, when that is necessary.
Yes, and just going off a bit of what Akko said to emphasize, it is when you put yourself in that struggle with people, right? It's not just that you're saying, oh, you're in solidarity with them, it's that, no, I have a stake, and because I have a stake, that's why I'm going to go and fight for them. Fight with them, fight alongside them, because I have a stake in this struggle, right? So apartheid's end is important to me, so I'm going to have a stake in that struggle, right? And so I think it's very important that it's something that you do alongside people and with people. It's not just this vague declaration of words.
Thanks. Next story, Brother Akko. Good reason.
So this sister, is another story coming out of Cuba, out of Granma. And I think it's a very important story for the Caribbean because, I myself have been hearing about this gaslighting, and, to some extent, they don't understand what it is. And a lot of people don't understand it. So there's an article in Granma that came out recently. And the headline is Gaslighting When They Make You Doubt Your Own Shadow. Right? And this is very important. And the subtitle is AI algorithms have the capacity to control almost everything that happens in cyberspace. So to read the article, it is taken from the Cuban Ministry of External Affairs. So much progress has been made since at the end of the 15th century, Leonardo da Vinci designed the first robot, which he named Automata Cavalieri, created for the amusement of guests at the Forza Palace in Milan. Today, in digital networks, we have powerful artificial intelligence, AI, and big data systems. AI algorithms have the capacity to control almost everything that happens inside cyberspace. Therefore, it is necessary to study the fundamental elements that operate both in our private lives and in the public sphere, to understand how reality is constructed and also destroyed, including gaslighting, framing, and agenda setting. The combination of these three is lethal. Let's begin with the most intimate and devastating. The term gaslighting comes from the film Gaslight in 1944, in which a husband manipulates his wife into believing she has lost her mind. He dims the gaslights in the house and swears that they are still just as bright, hides objects, and assures her that she has lost them. In the digital ecosystem, gaslighting transcends the realm of interpersonal manipulation to become a weapon of systemic disinformation. Its objective is not to deceive, but to erode the capacity of individuals and society to trust their own perception of reality. It is not merely to achieve political instability, but an epistemological fracture. Cyberspace is flooded with contradictory narratives about the same event. The aim is not to impose a lie, but to create such noise that the truth seems unattainable or a matter of opinion. Likewise, terms are co-opted and given meanings opposite to the originals, calling censorship freedom or aggression peace. Moreover, media outlets, journalists, and institutions that report uncomfortable truths are systematically discredited, labeled as fake, pro-government, or sold out to the regime. The goal is that when evidence is presented, the public automatically rejects it because it comes from an official source. Furthermore, social media algorithms, by prioritizing engagement, create bubbles in which the gaslighting narrative is repeated and reinforced without counterbalancing. Countering this form of manipulation requires a multifaceted approach that combines individual resilience with collective action. The first step would be to recognize that the information noise and constant contradictions are deliberate strategy. So I will stop here. It goes on. It's a very interesting article, right? So I would stop here at this point. One other thing I was at the end of the article, it says gaslighting in cyberspace exploits our dependence on digital information and our cognitive vulnerabilities. Countering it is not just an act of fact-checking, but an exercise in sovereignty and resilience. Okay, so
let me ask Sister Doc, do you remember when you first heard the terminology gaslighting?
Me or Akko?
You, sis, do you remember when you first heard it or became aware of it?
No, so I was actually quite interested to see it comes from this 1944 manipulation of the wife. I don't remember the first time I encountered the term gaslighting.
Brother Akka, what terminology, because this is something where I always wonder, nothing new under the sun. What terminology they may use for that experience before they start to use the one gaslighting? You could think of something, Brother Akka?
We would say disinformation, right? Was one of the terms we used. Disinformation was the one most popularly used. And so I started to see this term gaslighting, and I couldn't understand what it was, And so when I read this article in grammar, like, oh, this is where it came from. But again, remember, we just spoke about language, right? We just spoke about language and how language is used. So it is manipulation, right? It is propaganda. I mean, there is this book, it's a book on subliminal seduction is one of them that deals with the whole idea of how advertising was used to manipulate people into buying stuff, right? So this is a process that has been going on, but I think they finally found a word for it now, you know? So they call it gaslighting. And everyone is now using this term, gaslighting, which I didn't know until I read it. I came from this movie in 1940.
I didn't know that either, so I like learn new information. Okay, Brother Akko, we have like 6 minutes. Where I got for we could get now 6 minutes.
I do want to lend a comment though to this
Yeah, please,
piece
please do. Yeah.
because of something Sister Baina Bello said a few days ago. When we're talking about AI, we're not talking about intelligence. And when we're talking about a smartphone, we're not talking about something that is smart. These are programs that require, use, and deceive our own input. And if we're talking about language, we need to stop referring to these things as intelligent or smart because that plays into the power that they have to deceive us. These are programs, and because they are programs, people are profiting from them. And what they're profiting off of in these programs that we give power to when we call them intelligent or smart is that they decrease our ability to critically think about things in an age where social media platforms are also monopolized, meaning that they're owned by 2 or 3 people. They get to set the rules and control the algorithms on them. And so we need to be able to guard ourselves against propaganda, destabilization. We need to be able to teach people how to critically think. We also need to start up our own type of literacy campaigns outside of classrooms, but just in our community, because as is also something old, the first part of self-liberation or self-emancipation is to sort of free your mind or have the revolution in your mind first, because that starts with yourself. And so I think that we need to point out that these programs are decreasing and profiting off of people not being able to critically think, which makes them easier subjects of control.
I could appreciate that from Mama Baino, but one of the things where I had a different pan is the A. Then tell us straight up it's artificial. This not authentic. So if you pay attention, then it tell you this thing not real. But we bypass the artificial and focus only on the intelligence. And I definitely agree with the smart business because nothing smart about this. But
Yeah,
I
so
could have done to like 4 minutes now.
one of my brothers said we have to change it to ancestral intelligence, AI.
I like that, but then that's like what Sister Dr. said about us coming up with our own
Yes,
language, which is
ancestral
anti the
intelligence.
enslavement of our minds.
Yeah.
And that's our whole process. Sister talked earlier again, our Walter Rodney symposium, and I asked, well, who are the people that women today? They
All right.
actually live what they talk about. And so for me, I really look at you cannot give what you have not lived. I don't care how much colonial papers you have or how much book you write or what position of power you have. If your daily practice is not one of liberation for yourself or in solidarity with communities, then I don't got the time and energy for you. But I could only got 3 minutes left.
All right, so this one article here is a very important article for the Caribbean, because of the health challenges that exist throughout the Caribbean, which is sometimes underreported. And this comes out of Barbados. And there is an article, I think it's The Nation, and the headline is Productivity Down $140 million due to NCD's non-communicable diseases, right? So Barbados is losing 140 million each year in productivity due to non-communicable diseases. The staggering fact and figure was revealed by Minister of State in the Ministry of Health, who said that there was a sustained effort to reduce the number of deaths due to NCDs in the country. His comments came during the press conference to launch the Live Stronger Longer Diabetes and Hypertension Association of Barbados and Republic Blue Wellness Conference. Okay? When it comes to the workplace, they are not able to do as much as they used to, produce as much as they used to because of debilitating disease. There's a larger impact. The deaths are what we're trying to prevent. We love our people, but we also want our people to live healthier, the minister said. He said NCDs accounted for 80% of adult deaths in Barbados. adding that the ministry invested heavily in both prevention and treatment of such diseases, with annual expenditure of 375 million to 800 million. The minister said it had developed its NCD unit to drive public education, advocacy, and the development of programs. He encouraged increased physical activity and said the ministry would continue to implement initiatives to support healthier lifestyle. And so I will stop here because it's a very important issue throughout the Caribbean. A large part of it, too, is because of the fact that we have changed our diets and we are now eating more American food. And also, to compound this now, we have a situation where we are now excluded the Cuban doctors from the health system in the Caribbean. So we are now facing this health crisis, and Barbados is speaking about it, but it exists in most of the Caribbean countries. And so I would end here with that comment.
Thanks for the echo. Quickly, sister, tell away.
Very quickly, I would say that hypertension and things like diabetes have been something that we know exists in our communities, and it's sad that this is only being taken seriously in the context of declining productivity, which again treats us as economic subjects in the capitalist system. Why should we only care about our health when it comes to these questions of productivity? I think that healthiness should be something that we focus on, whether or not someone can be productive or not, because this again points out the fact that this is going to be program that they're focusing on for people who are working or people who they think can be productive, versus a wider program to address health issues that exist in Barbados writ large and in the Caribbean writ large, because we're importing so much food.
Thank you, Sister Dr. Tamanisha J, Brother Mutota. It's break time. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Okay.
I overwhelmed. I don't even know how to talk right now.
Estamos súper emocionados, estoy temblando, súper agradecida con todo. Ellos súper felices.
I received a whole 2-bedroom house for me and my son and my daughter right here. So it's more than emotional. Thanks very much.
I'm grateful as a single parent right now to actually own one.
I feel like a load has been lifted off my shoulder receiving this key today. Currently, I'm living with my sister. I'm invading her privacy, so this changes a lot, not only for me, but for her.
I'm like, keep on my knees. I keep on praying and I keep on asking God, let this be successful this time, because I have already tried 4 times. Everything done, baby. Everything done. No more hunger, no more starvation.
We want to thank the Ministry of Housing. We want to thank Minister Julius, the members of the housing team that were able to partner with us, partner with Fort George to be able to provide for these ladies.
I'm very grateful that we have this program that can support individuals like her who are trying to live the right way and trying to provide for their families. Our job is to support them and to give them a lifting hand.
All families are deserving of a dignified home. All children are certainly deserving of having their own place. I believe in this government. I believe in the ministry, the minister, the leadership of MIDH, and I believe in the leadership of our Prime Minister, Honorable John Briceño.
Thank you.
For decades, BEL has powered Belize's growth and progress, lighting homes, energizing industries and fueling national development. But in a world reshaped by extreme weather patterns, digital transformation, and evolving customer needs, the future of energy demands a new approach. The future of energy is now, and it's not just about new technology, it's about people and how we use, manage, and store power smarter. BEL is leading the transformation, blending modern advancements with the wisdom of sustainable energy practices. Integrating technologies will redefine how Belize produces and uses energy. With distributed generation and smart grid technologies, customers are becoming power partners. Energy is no longer a one-way street. BEL is making key investments that will reinforce the grid to make this a reality, ensuring energy security for generations. At BEL, we are more than an energy provider. We work to safeguard Belize's energy future, which will have demand response programs, where customers will be able to shift use during peak hours to take advantage of the new time of use or off-peak rate structures, customer energy portals, real-time insights and tools to track usage and manage energy smarter, smart metering, advanced metering infrastructure, faster, safer service and actionable energy insights, distributed generation, integrating rooftop solar, microgrids and battery storage for two-way power flows into the national grid. Together, we are bringing you a brighter tomorrow.
Belize wakes up connected to opportunity. And across our country, the work to keep Belize connected continues. SMART continues expanding our network across the country, bringing stronger coverage to more communities. With recent service enhancements in areas at Blue Creek and Progresso, Belize City, Orange Rock, and more on the way. We're bringing education closer to home, empowering entrepreneurs to grow their businesses, supporting industries that drive our economy, and keeping families connected wherever life takes them. With every expansion, we are investing in the infrastructure that moves Belize forward. Because connection isn't just about signal, it's about opportunity, progress, and the future we are building together. SMART, bringing people together.
At Atlantic Bank, your convenience is our priority. Our contact center is designed to enhance your banking experience. With a wide range of customer service options, you save time and effort. You can easily call in to block or unblock your debit and credit cards, perform account inquiries, and access detailed card information. Whether you need assistance with online banking, merchant support, or general inquiries, our team is ready to help. For added convenience, if all operators are busy, you can leave your number and an operator will return your call as soon as possible to ensure you receive the support you need. Depending on your transaction type, we may need to verify your identity through a set of security questions. And remember, Atlantic Bank will never request your username or password for Atlantic Online via phone call, text, or email, ensuring your personal information remains safe and secure. Our support team is available Monday to Friday from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. in both English and Spanish. Simply dial 223-1212. This is a dedicated line for our contact center. Atlantic Bank is committed to providing you with exceptional service and the tools you need to manage your finances conveniently and securely. Take full advantage of our easy-to-use contact center services today.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together. Have a vision? We've got what you need.
idea to install. Brothers Habet, all your building needs under one roof.
Guatemala, this is we have figure. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This Guatemala, this is we have figure. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This is me. My name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad, love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. This is the we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This is the we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This is me. My name is Pupa. Believe me, come from the Belize City area. 110%.
Welcome back to the second segment of Sunday Review with Sister YaYa, Brother Akko, and Sister Dr. Tamanisha. Stories in this segment, Brother Akko, and try to get to, start off with Jamaica.
Yes, so this is an article out of Jamaica, and the headline on this article deals with the Mid-East War and its effects on the Caribbean. So the headline is Mid-East War Threatens Food Security in Caribbean. CARICOM official warns. Warning of the threat the ongoing Mid-East conflict poses to the Caribbean's food and economic security. Wendell Samuel, Assistant Secretary General of CARICOM, is calling for stronger regional coordination to enhance resilience, bargaining power, and capacity to absorb external shocks. Speaking on Friday during a Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, FAO, hybrid regional dialogue on the conflict's implication for agri-food systems in Latin America and the Caribbean, Samuel noted that while the Caribbean region is geographically distant from the conflict, its economies remain highly exposed to the global shocks transmitted through energy markets, food systems, and global supply chains. CARICOM's high import dependence for food, fuel, fertilizers, and shipping services means that the external geopolitical tensions quickly morph into domestic economic challenges, he said. Inflation, food affordability, fiscal stability are not abstract risks for us. They are immediate public policy concerns. The US-Israel war with Iran has generated pressures on global energy, fertilizer, and agri-food systems. The disruption stems from constraints on global shipping after Iran imposed a blockade on ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, a significant maritime route that connects major Gulf energy producers with international markets. So I will end here. I think this says it all. It goes on to say, for example, these impacts are seen higher production costs, pressure on food prices, and risks to food security, particularly in countries with high import dependency. CARICOM as a bloc imports more than 60% of its food, right? And over the period of 2018 to 2020, the CARICOM food import bill was US $13.76 billion, or approximately 5% of GDP. I think that was important to add. So let's...
What's your take on it, Brother Akko?
Well, this is something I've commented on, that we were exporting food. I mean, part of our the founding of these societies were as societies produced for the metropoles, whether it was food and other kinds of, initially food, sugarcane and other kinds of products. What has happened is since independence, we have systematically degraded our agricultural system in terms of our self-sufficiency. For example, in Trinidad, when we got the oil boom and subsequently the gas boom, people said the policy was it was cheaper to import food than to grow your own food. I think a similar situation happened in Guyana too. So this is what has happened in terms of food self-sufficiency in the Caribbean is a deliberate policy of degrading our indigenous food systems. And so the result of this is what you see now. Any shocks or any disturbance in the international system, we are affected. Also, it is a part of the U.S. in particular policy to create dependency on the U.S. for food supplies. So you want grants from the World Bank or the IMF, one of the things sometimes they do is to encourage you to diminish your agricultural sector. So this is a policy failure on behalf of by our political leaders and our elites, what I call the kakistocracy, because not just the political leaders, it is the economists and the intellectuals in UE and so on who repeat these garbage from the IMF as policy initiatives and so on and so forth. So that would be my initial take on it. Yeah.
What's your take, sister?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Akko said, and I just want to reiterate something that we said in the first part of this show, which is this is why solidarity is important, and this is also why solidarity is something that happens locally and globally, because the terrain of struggle is also global. Food dependence in the Caribbean and elsewhere not only means imports, but it also means that food itself becomes negatively impacted by the global political economy. And people may be thinking, well, how is food related to energy or oil? But food is delivered on transporting vehicles like ships, cars, and trucks that rely on oil and gas. I think it was the last time I was actually on Sunday Review where there was a guest who said World War I and World War II were fought on coal. And coal helped fuel militaries, it helped fuel the industries and production. And when Germany was cut off from coal in World War I, it lost. And even though Britain had a lot of coal in World War II, it didn't have enough consumption of it to sort of maintain itself, which is why you had to bring in all of the other people. And that these future wars will be fought on oil, since oil controls so much of industrial production, food arrivals, and everything. We have to talk about food dependence in the Caribbean, though, not only as the sort of being oil dependent or the blocking of the Strait of Hormuz, but we must also remember that the U.S. does not care if people in the Caribbean starve. The U.S. got rid of the indigenous Creole pigs in Haiti systematically because they feared it would disrupt the pork industry in North America. So that means that they made extinct a local pig source in Haiti to bring in their own pigs that had swine flu and all of these things, because they want to disrupt and kill our indigenous food industries that would outcompete their own. And we have to be very clear about this, is that it's not just that we're food dependent, but we are made to be food dependent because they don't want competitive challenges to food industries in the United States that they force us to import food from. And I think that we have to keep that in mind, because food sovereignty, just like political and economic sovereignty, is important, not just for our own livelihoods, but also for our environment. When we're importing food and growing non-local items, we're messing up the soil longevity and all of these other things. And so just keep that in mind as well.
I definitely see the value of us being politically aware and knowing our stories from the past, for understand that one lot of these practices that are new practices. Like in Belize, I believe it was in 1786, the Convention of London, they make the European settlers know, Spain did, I can tell you something, uno could rape and scrape the laguna and the mahogany, but they don't have no planting this so at all. So from the inception, I remember indigenous people mean at this era before the European people come, 1768, I think it was, they make no planting not happen here. But with us not knowing our stories, and then over the years, you have colonial leaders who are mentally enslaved. And because, Brother Akwa, what I really want to know, just remind me again, if there was any serious decolonizing movement in the Caribbean region, for say that the leaders, they want to be aware and then make decisions that are really in the interest of the people. But most of these political parties, that just people were go along with flag and anthem independence. Was there really any serious organizing for have one decolonizing state, let's say outside of the Grenada Revolution and Cuba?
Well, you had individuals in almost every Caribbean territory who attempted genuine decolonization. So C.L.R. James in Trinidad, for example, C.L.R. James and Eric Williams are very close. When Williams came to power, C.L.R. James joined the PNM, and he and Williams fell out, and Williams, in fact, placed him under house arrest and made C.L.R. James persona non grata, because C.L.R. James' view was we needed not just a traditional political party, but we really needed the party as a vehicle of decolonization. So you had individuals, and his attempt at a political party in Trinidad, the Workers and Farmers Party in 1966, failed. You see, right? He and a number of other left-wing people formed this party. So that's one example, and there were others in the Caribbean. I mean, the T.A. Mari showed the famous statement, "The West Indies must be West Indian." He was a Grenadian who basically said that we needed an indigenous Caribbean polity and indigenous Caribbean sociology. So it happened in that word. The West Indies must be West Indian, not British. Right? And you can go like the poems of Martin Carter in Guyana. Okay, the attempts by people like U.C. Quine and Chelly Jagan, which caused the intervention of the British. So there were attempts, but the leaders who inherited what I call who came to power during independence, they were run-of-the-mill neo-colonial leaders who saw the state as means to advance their personal careers, as means to put wealth in the pockets of their friends and their families, and basically to maintain the colonial bourgeois state. But there were attempts by individuals and some organizations which did not survive to attempt genuine decolonization.
And oftentimes when you hear of these stories, sis, you don't hear about the women voices. You keep hear the man their voice, as if the women weren't in meaningful, like quote that quote from Ancestress Ella Baker, please forgive the sister credit for her brilliance, even though she's oftentimes not recognized. Brother Walter Rodney is often recognized for that quote when he get it from the sister. I think every chance we get, we really need to uplift the names of our African ancestresses and even African sisters now who did the meaningful work for the liberation of African people.
Yes, and this quote by Ella Baker says, "A strong people do not need strong leaders." And this is a part of historical memory and resistance and learning from our mistakes, learning that the struggle must go on, forward, never backward, forward, ever, backward, never. And just recognizing that if sort of the type of vanguardist ideas or political parties that we had experimented with in the Caribbean had certain failures, how do we move on and continue our left movements and struggles from that? And if we have strong people, then we wouldn't put so much of our aspirations, hope, and determination for a progressive change in these sort of singular leaders and singular individuals. And I think that these understandings and learning from this is why feminist organizations in the Caribbean have still continued on to this day, as we were sort of talking about before this.
Thanks, sis. And Brother Akkad, before you go to the next story, please tell me.
I want to mention, because you are correct, there was a woman in Trinidad called Emma Francois, who was born in St. Vincent, and who was one of the principal leaders in the labor movement in Trinidad. And she's described as an Afrocentric socialist labor leader. And those who lived at the time, some of the people who lived during her time, would have told you that she was more advanced ideologically than some of the men. She took more progressive positions. But because we inherited this patriarchy from colonialism, she herself was never given credit for the work she did. She was declared a heroine, a national hero, I think, in Trinidad and in Barbados. But there is a book written on her by Dr. Rhoda Reddock, and hopefully we can get Dr. Reddock to come on this show and speak about Emma Francois. That's something we could do in the future. But you are correct. A number of women, there is a case in Trinidad, before I move on to the next story, which incidentally deals with women in Bahamas. there was an incident that happened in June 22nd, 1937 in Trinidad. Right? So most people who knew about the labor uprising in Trinidad knows about what happened on June 19th, 1937, in which they tried to arrest Butler, a policeman was killed, and the whole country went into an uproar. But in my community, not too far, in a place called Rio Claro, like 3 days later, the people protested and the police shot like 14 people and killed 4. Okay? Among the people who were arrested was a woman called Josephine Charles. And she was the only woman of the 15 or 16 people arrested. Okay? And when she was being sentenced, to quote the magistrate, "You want to be in man business? I'll show you what man does get." And gave her the harshest sentence of everyone who were arrested that day on June 22nd. You understand? So this is important history to understand. You understand? Right now, we in that community, there is a street named after the British estate owner who on the estate which she was called Beaumont, and we're trying to get that street name changed to Josephine Charles Street to honor her memory and her struggles.
I know we have one certain amount of stories that we try to cover, but I really appreciate when the conversations expand organically and I get one opportunity for learn or relearn. So I know you have a story I want to share, Brother Akko, but I have to tell you that the juicy fast as a review. I like. Go ahead to your next story, Brother Akko.
So the next story following, which would maybe I should read. Yeah, we'll do it after. But this one is on Guyana, and it was written an editorial was written, I think, by the leader of the opposition in Guyana. The headline is "Government Failed to Protect Guyana's Interests in Relation to Cuba," written by Aubrey Norton. The leader of the People's National Congress Reform, Aubrey Norton, says the government failed to adequately engage and negotiate with the United States over concerns surrounding Cuban medical missions, arguing that the health system still benefits from the expertise and support provided through its long-standing partnership with Havana. Speaking at a press conference, Norton said the government should have treated the matter as a foreign policy issue, requiring diplomacy rather than allowing the medical cooperation program end. And so I do believe that there's a failure of the government to engage, negotiate, and protect our interests, because our interest also lies in us having the expertise and the support from the Cuban system to facilitate and help our health system. As I understand it, the government of the United States is contending that we should get rid of the Cuban workers. And the sole premise seems to be that the Cuban doctors are being exploited because a lot of the resources go to the government rather than the doctors. However, Norton argued that the issue should be examined within its historical and geopolitical context. He noted that during the early 1970s, the United States moved to establish diplomatic engagement with countries such as China and the Soviet Union, even as relations with Cuba remain strained due to the long-standing U.S. embargo. And so this is what I'll end with that here, because I think the headline captures the thing. And it is not just Guyana, it is the entire Caribbean leadership. And it's when this thing emerged, I made a comment, I think on Sunday Review. They are telling us now, the first was the fact that they didn't want our students to study in Cuba. So we're at the point now where a foreign government is telling us where we can learn. And the sort of comment I made, kind of rhetorical, was that maybe just not to tell us who to marry, they will tell us who to marry. So this is a position we should have taken, that no one should tell us where to go to learn, And so I remember the Prime Minister of St. Lucia very shamelessly, basically throwing his hands up like, well, the United States, the great United States don't want us to go to Cuba. In the room, he was speaking to hard Cuban doctors, and they raised their hands. And so you are telling me that as a leader of a sovereign state, someone can tell you, don't send your people there to learn, and you just roll over and accept that. So this So while not may have spoken about the situation in Guyana from a diplomatic point of view, it is a capitulation throughout the Caribbean. And we have to understand the shameful role the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago played in this thing also. It is terrible. And so this is just a continuation of this capitulation by these governments in the Caribbean.
It's interesting you should say that, Brother Akko. I'm going to listen to on YouTube or look for it during the break, one YouTube conversation with African ancestress Sister Andai from Guyana. And I think it might have been, I don't want to call the wrong name, I want to find out the man name. But one of the interesting things she said about Brother Walter Rodney is for people growing up like in Guyana, they had one level of political awareness at a young age. So she said, Walter Rodney tell those teasers that she, Sister Andai, come from the north, and him, Brother Walter, come from the south. I know how it go with the north south business, right? The north usually more developed than the south. And that at a young age, I think he knows deliver newspaper, and he made to pay attention, like who buy the paper and who not buy the paper, so a political consciousness to get developed. And she just said that when people grow up in that kind of environment, then develop one confidence about themselves for challenge power. They don't have that mindset that, oh, we don't want small country or we don't want impoverished country so we can challenge power, which is something I never thought about. Like, where do people develop the confidence at a young age? Oftentimes, for then, when they become mature adults, that they have the confidence that then could change the world and make it the place where they want to see. Have you heard that before, Sister, Brother Akko, about having the confidence for know or could make the change where we need as a people?
Yeah, Sister YaYa, someone asked me that a couple of days ago, what was the factor in changing my consciousness? And I went back to an incident that happened when I was 15 years, I think, or 16. It was the St. Kitts, Nevis, and Anguilla was one country. And Anguilla separated from St. Kitts and Nevis. They wanted independence. That's 1969, I think it was. Because I was 16. So I was asked in school to write what they call a composition, which they call it those days. And I wrote this essay on a composition on the British, and I was so incensed that the British sent a group of troops called the Red Devils to Anguilla. And I remember the line I wrote at the end, the British were toothless bulldogs. That was my thing about it. I was very upset at that right. So part of it for me, and I believe what would have inspired me to have that kind of thinking, was I was the first generation in my family in school not to sing God Save the King or the Queen as a national anthem. When I went to primary school, we were being schooled in all the national songs because we got independence in 1962. So during that time, I was in primary school. I would have started primary school just a few years before that. So, and the teachers were telling us about independence and the promise of independence and all of these things. And I would tell them they did a pretty good job because they did inspire a lot of confidence in us as children about the promise of independence. And I think so that shaped a different consciousness among us as children, and which eventually translated into our teenage years and so on. In other words, we were more radical without knowing that we were more radical than our parents. Because we did not have to sing God Save the King or God's. I don't ever remember, but my mother did in school. God Save the King was the anthem. So that to me would have been the trigger, the independence and the promise of what it meant as articulated by our educators and people around in the community, what this promise meant. I mean, 8 years later, we're all disappointed, and which led to the revolt with the Black Power movement, that the promise of independence never materialized. because the same people who running the banks, the same running the oil companies, and so the black power movement exploded the myth of independence. So I think that, for me, would have been the thing that would have been triggered my conscience. Plus reading a lot. I began to, like at 16, I got into this apprentice program, and there were a lot of books in the groceries in those days had books. You could go and buy these little paperbacks, and I started to read all these things on African history and different kinds of political theories. And, and so those things were the things that contributed to my own consciousness. And I think it would have contributed to other people who have been.
Respect. The YouTube conversation was between Horace Campbell and I on Walter Rodney. I would recommend you to go listen to it. I think about 40 minutes long. It's worth listening to. And I like that conversation humanized Brother Walter in a way that I don't usually hear when they talk about that. Anything you want to say before we got a break, sis?
I would just say that I also think that for me, confidence was instilled by my grandparents and my family. Like, I remember when I was younger, anytime I would get in trouble, the punishment was either I had to clean or read a book. Before I hit the age of 12, I would always choose to clean, but after 12, I guess I gained enough sense to say, let me read a book. But it was, I had to read a book and I had to write a page about what the book was saying. And my grandparents, they had a lot of intellectual books, I would say, and I would write what it was saying. And because of sort of how respect and stuff worked in my family, whatever I would write, my grandparents, they would read it with their friends and they would have these debates. And I was able to listen, but I couldn't speak because I was a kid. So I grew up with them saying, tell it straight, and kids should be seen, not heard in adult conversations. And so I remember when I hit 16 or 17, that was still the punishment. And I started to be able to come into these conversations with my family about what I had written. And so I think that sort of intellectualizing debates at home about politics gave me confidence. And also the fact that my parents advocated for me. Anytime I heard nonsense in school, and even now if my nephews hear nonsense in school, my mom, my grandmother, my grandfather, none of them were above coming up to the school telling them, no, what you're teaching is about nonsense. Because in the US, you had some schools trying to equate Fidel Castro with Adolf Hitler. And I would always be the first in the class to say that's not true. And socialism and communism were not scary words. Even though I didn't know what they meant when I was younger, they weren't scary to me. So I think that not censoring political information for kids, letting them know that these are topics you can healthily talk about, gives them confidence to then go out, learn more, and do what they do.
So we know so you could clean good and you're well read. And your critical thinking skills nurtured from home. All right. Thanks, Brother Akka. Thanks, sis. We're going to take a quick break and come right back.
Get your body sculpted with gym equipment and accessories from Benny's. Quality and savings.
Belize wakes up connected to opportunity. And across our country, the work to keep Belize connected continues. SMART continues expanding our network across the country, bringing stronger coverage to more communities. With recent service enhancements in areas at Blue Creek and Progresso, Belize City, Orange Walk, and more on the way. We're bringing education closer to home, empowering entrepreneurs to grow their businesses, supporting industries that drive our economy, and keeping families connected wherever life takes them. With every expansion, we are investing in the infrastructure that moves Belize forward. Because connection isn't just about signal, it's about opportunity, progress, and the future we are building together. SMART, bringing people together.
I overwhelmed. I don't even know. I don't even know how to talk right now.
Estamos súper emocionados, estoy temblando, súper agradecida con todo. Ellos súper felices.
I receive a whole 2-bedroom house for me and my son and my daughter right here. So it's more than emotional.
Thanks very much.
I'm grateful as a single parent right now to actually own one.
I feel like a load has been lifted off my shoulder receiving this key today. Currently, I'm living with my sister. I'm invading her privacy, so this changes a lot, not only for me, but for her.
I'm like, keep on my knees. I keep on praying and I keep on asking God, let this be successful this time, because I have already tried 4 times.
Everything done, baby. Everything done. No more hunger, no more starvation.
We want to thank the Ministry of Housing. We want to thank Minister Julius, the members of the housing team that were able to partner with us, partner with Fort George to be able to provide for these ladies.
I'm very grateful that we have this program that can support individuals like her who are, trying to live the right way and trying to provide for their families. Our job is to support them and to give them a lifting hand.
All families are deserving of a dignified home. All children are certainly deserving of having their own place. I believe in this government. I believe in the ministry, the minister, the leadership of MIDH, and I believe in the leadership of our Prime Minister, Honorable John Briceño.
Thank you.
En Atlantic Bank, tu comodidad es nuestra prioridad. Nuestro centro de contacto está diseñado para mejorar tu experiencia bancaria, con una amplia gama de opciones de servicio al cliente. Ahorras tiempo y esfuerzo. Puedes llamar fácilmente para bloquear o desbloquear tus tarjetas de débito y crédito, realizar consultas de cuentas y acceder a información detallada de tus tarjetas. Ya sea que necesites asistencia con la banca en línea, apoyo para comercios o consultas generales, nuestro equipo está listo para ayudarte. Para mayor comodidad, si todos los operadores están ocupados, puedes dejar tu número y un operador te devolverá la llamada lo antes posible, para asegurarse de que recibas el apoyo que necesitas. Para mayor seguridad, es posible que necesitemos verificar tu identidad con un conjunto de preguntas sencillas. Recuerda, Atlantic Bank nunca solicitará tu nombre de tu usuario ni contraseña de Atlantic Online por llamada telefónica, mensaje de texto o correo electrónico, asegurando que tu información personal permanezca segura y protegida. Nuestro equipo de apoyo está disponible de lunes a viernes, de 8 a.m. a 6 p.m. en inglés y en español. Simplemente marca al 223-1212. Esta es la línea dedicada para nuestro centro de contacto. Atlantic Bank se compromete a brindarte un servicio excepcional y las herramientas que necesitas para administrar tus finanzas de manera conveniente y segura. Aprovecha al máximo nuestro servicio del centro de contacto.
Atlantic Bank, building the future together.
Tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about the heavenly billies and dollar because patriots. All people who love love them country, bad, bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. Them country, bad, bad, love them homeland. We'll never give it up to another nation. This time we we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. Follow me now. This time we the fear. Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time my name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. No, tell me about maritime area. Long time ago, agreement by the slave master. Talking about
And welcome back to Sunday Review, final segment. We should probably have our segment, but we thought we'll in at a break because it's really juicy. Brother Akko, what story you have? We have like 19 minutes.
So this one is out of the Bahamas, and it relates to what we spoke about earlier. The headline is, and it's an opinion piece written by a woman in a newspaper in Bahamas. And the headline is, Bahamas must put women at the center of the next economy. So, and it begins, I'm writing this letter as a Bahamian woman who has witnessed and experienced the obstacles created by inadequate policies, frameworks, and plans that fail to address the realities of the 21st century. I see the impact these issues have had on my own opportunities as a woman, and I'm deeply concerned about the deteriorating conditions for my daughters and women throughout this country. The world has not been intentionally structured to support women's leadership, and the Bahamas has done far too little to change this reality. Bahamian women have long carried families, communities, ministries, schools, businesses, and entire sectors of our national life. Yet the systems that distribute capital, technology, infrastructure, and economic leverage still do not adequately support us at scale. Bahamian women are expected to produce, adapt, and endure, but too often without tools we need to lead fully in a modern economy. Access to both technology and AI must not be a secondary issue reserved for a select group of Bahamians. It must be addressed as a national development priority. AI has the potential to become the great equalizer of our time. It can help Bahamian women conduct research more efficiently, analyze markets, automate routine risks, strengthen decision-making, build businesses, improve productivity, and reduce dependence on traditional gatekeepers. However, AI is not alone. If the Bahamas is serious about advancing Bahamian women, enhancing national competitiveness, and ensuring future-ready growth, then our country needs more than speeches about innovation. We need concrete plans, frameworks, and execution. The next government must come into office with a technology that's ready to be implemented from day one, and so on. And she goes on to say that they must have documents, but not only a desire to express and modernize, but proof that they're going to be operationally prepared for immediate action. So the headline, I think, captures the story. And this, again, is a story that impacts the entire Caribbean. Some may be a little more advanced than others, but generally, in too many instances, women are not given the kind of role and their place in the society and in terms of advancing the development of this country.
Thanks, Brother Akko. It made me think about, in the past few weeks, there's been pushback. You hear it on the talk shows, it's been on the news. Forgot this organization in Belize that deals with healthcare. It just got into my mind, but the state has decided that you need to have prescription now to get medication that used to buy over the counter. And they're saying it has always been a law, but they're just not enforcing it. And so people will have, for example, diabetes, and like nobody no got time for study to go to a clinic to get to a diabetes prescription. I mean, prescription for asthma pump, prescription for contraceptive. It's just like this has been a big pushback, and one of the rare times the state actually said, listen, the Prime Minister said my wife actually hold me accountable big time as it relates to the prescription for contraceptive. BFLA, Believe Family Life Association, came out strong and said what a setback this is for women. And so it's seen at one a few times when the state they say, listen, we get it wrong, we have to go back and have conversations across departments and ministries and correct it. But a few times we have to wait and see what they want to actually do. But indeed, and one of the things why Red Thread was even created in Guyana, because even within the Working People's Alliance, they recognize, listen, the patriarchy is real. Women have to have one space for themselves, and especially working class women, and prioritize the things that are of importance for them. At the time, one of the big thing was that women were working in homes and expected for care and clean and not get no financial compensation. And so centering everyday people for make them prioritize what matter to them, and advocate them for their own interests, that always one plus for me. Make I hear 2 cents, sis.
I think that anytime there's conversations on digital or technological infrastructure in the Caribbean that reaches everyone on the island, the scope is always limited since we're not being real. And when I say we, I should say that the political parties or the governments are not being real on who development partners are. So, for instance, a couple years ago, Jamaica wanted to institute island-wide 5G. And China was the only country who came forward saying they were going to help them with that. And the US told them, no, you can't do that. Otherwise, we're going to sanction you. So Jamaica ended up doing the 5G with, I think the US okayed them for some Swedish company. But this Swedish company mostly prioritized the 5G in like Kingston and some of the already developed areas. So that means that the rural people or the countryside people in Jamaica are going to be left out of that equation. And today, I fear in this environment where so many states are caving to US pressures, the person in this piece, their fears are going to come true, in that who gets this access is still going to be limited. And so I don't think that we're talking about real development in the Caribbean if we're not addressing the elephant in the room, in the sense that the US is not a development partner, it's an exploitative partner. And if we want our governments to engage in development, we have to be honest about which actors in the global world are providing not just the capital for that development, but making sure that the development in our countries are wide-reaching and not centralized or localized in these small places. And I would never forget, I think the last time I was on Sunday Review, we were talking about how Marco Rubio was saying like, oh, you know, China is developing bad roads in Guyana, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But when the question became, oh, will the US develop these roads instead so that we don't have to rely on China? The answer was no. And so what do our partnerships look like with other Caribbean countries, with other countries globally for these kinds of development? And if we live in countries, I think Bahamas actually has more women living in the Bahamas than men. So when we say that women are being left out, it's a large segment of the population in the country, that I think that we have to think about the wider scope of development in the region. And only in thinking about it in a wider scope can we focus on women and girls, because currently they are being discarded in these development frameworks that are limited by design.
Well, what often happens with these political leaders, and that the people keep the vote there, is that similarly how then a report to we about developmental partners, they don't communicate in any meaningful way with the people in the communities that they represent. They keep having these so-called consultations, which are not genuine, which are not meaningful. For example, the green light, the proposed cargo and cruise development, 900 million Belize dollars development, smack dab in working class people community, in the Port Loyola community in Southside Belize City, with no genuine, meaningful people conversations. And not just for the people who live nearest to the port, because the environmental impact will impact everybody in the country. And then water, the ocean travel beyond the borders, the coastal areas of Belize, the country of Belize. So where is the holding political leaders genuinely accountable? Because for them, like, one could talk, one could go on a talk show, one could write in a letter, one could have international partners, solidarity partners. We want to do what we want anyways. So the same way the United States just do what they want with Caribbean leadership do what they want with the people in the Caribbean countries. But then we, the Caribbean people, have to admit that we complicit. So where do we kind of get what's right, especially with what they go on in the Strait of Hormuz? What we for the know? But what we there with this, brother Akko?
Repeat your question. The last thing
We, the Caribbean people, are complicit consistently in our own demise. Like, this is generational. What we for do at this point?
Well, you know, it is not all of us. Okay? That's the first thing you have to understand. There is an attempt to paint a picture that all of us are indifferent and that no one is struggling in the Caribbean. There are people every day in the Caribbean who are struggling against U.S. imperialism, against capitalism, and against the neo-colonial state. Some do it in organized fashions. Like, for example, in Trinidad right now, there is a state of emergency. And the nurses had a struggle issue with the government. And during the state of emergency, you can't protest, you see, because that's against the state of emergency. But they found a creative way in the hospital itself, there was a protest, right? Which, you know, they just occupied the hospital as nurses and had a silent protest. So there are people protesting these governments every single day. Unfortunately, we have a media that whose objective is disinformation and propaganda. You see, there is nothing called a free press. You know, I've always used this example. If you look at what's the guy name on CNN? He's a Vanderbilt boy. I forgot his name anyway. But he's a multimillionaire. Okay, so the people who are reading the news are multimillionaires. The people who own the media are billionaires. So you have a situation where the billionaires are paying the millionaires to read the news. You think you're going to get truth there between billionaires and billionaires? Absolutely not. And so this is what we have to understand. People are struggling. People are every day trying. So it is not that everyone is complicit. What we also have to understand, which I think sometimes we are not doing enough of consciously, and which is something I said in an interview a couple of weeks ago when they asked me about the violence in Haiti and the using drones. So I said, whether it's a musket in 1500 or a drone in 2026, capitalism brought violence. That's how it came. So we cannot get caught up in using drones or they're using tanks. This is a system of violence, whether it's a musket or drones or whatever, or aircraft carriers. So we have to understand these things in context. And we also have to understand that what we are struggling against is not necessarily our governments. We are struggling against a capitalist system, right? A system of imperialism and a state that emerged from that and will defend that at all costs. And we can't think like in Trinidad, well, because the Indian government in power or the African and Trinidad and Guyana, you know, like I said, there was a slogan the current government had: when everybody wins, when everybody vote, you vote the UNC, everybody wins. And I turned it and I said, when you vote the UNC, you get a version of the PNM. When you vote the PNM, you get a version of the UNC. They are the same, playing race games and so. But all it is about maintenance of the system, and what Dr. Herb Adu said, it is about adjustments and continuity. So if the masses rise up, they get some wages, but it's an adjustment the system make. But to continue the same capitalistic and imperialist order. And I think that is something we need to emphasize more. We are too caught up, to me, sometimes in focusing on issues that, while they are important, but they are not fundamental issues. They are primary contradictions, not fundamental. And the fundamental that we are up against a capitalist imperialist system, which Trump has exposed in its most nakedness, right? Others have done it, but they were more sophisticated. You know, they sweeten it up, but he's just naked with it. And this is what we have to understand, I think, and interpret that terms of when we speak with people, that this is a struggle against imperialism and capitalism and all its derivatives, whether it is slavery, chattel slavery, or colonialism, or neocolonialism.
Big thanks for that reminder, Brother Akko. Indeed, they're not all away complicit. Some are away, even though at least steady handful, and to remember that it's systems that we're struggling against. Yes, sis, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, yes, big up to what Akko just said. And guarding ourselves against capitalism and imperialism is going to require us to be organized and disciplined enough to take state power so that we can defend ourselves. I want people to be clear that Iran's gains today is precisely because that state has the power to guard itself against sort of US imperialism, and it's developed a resistance economy in the wake of US sanctions against it. That is what real sovereignty looks like, even though the US is screaming about regime change. Oh, we've killed all of the leaders. But the struggle in Iran still goes on because the people have this sort of consciousness or awareness that what we're defending is our homeland and our sovereignty. We need to bring back those types of sort of movements in the Caribbean, like get people involved in taking back our states. I think that what happens is that political elites in the Caribbean are remade in the image of US and Western capitalism, and that is all that they want to emulate, and that is all that they want to protect. Where Caribbean people, by being born in the Caribbean, become second-class citizens in their own country, since you have governments that are more beholden to foreign capitalists, foreign interests, foreign desires, wants, foreign brands on clothing and cars and stuff. And I think that we as people need to make movements to reject that and reject leadership that want to emulate that in some of the grossest ways possible. Because all that's going to happen is we're going to have leaders, as we see in the Gulf countries, who don't care if we're bombed today or tomorrow, as long as they get to maintain themselves and sustain themselves. And so I think we need to be looking at what's happening in the Gulf, US imperialism against Iran, and see that that could be us. That was us when so many states consented to Venezuela being bombed and the president being kidnapped. That is us when some of us support the fact that Haitians don't get to elect who is their leaders, but the US and these other countries get to choose it. And now we have some of our same stupid leaders coming out saying, oh, Cuba isn't democratic, so now the US somehow is going to choose their leaders, and that's going to be democracy for the Cuban people. We have to be honest about these things and lay them bare and open. And we've had these conversations before about how bad media is in the Caribbean and why we need better media. And so, yes, I just think that these are all things that we have to seriously think about.
I agree. And I shamelessly now plugging XTV, Creme Radio, and Mandela newspaper. As Brother Akko said, Belize is the only place that have something physical out of we Black Power movement that is still lasting, that still serve the interests of the people in our liberation struggle. And I shameless and bragging for the African people who created this space and other Belizeans who make sure that we only have what we have and at great sacrifice because of people, loyalty, and support. So big up the people that support I call Zinc Fence Media. Final thoughts, sis, Tamanisha J and Brother Akko Mutota. Final thoughts.
Final thoughts. This was an excellent conversation. Learn history, get organized, get disciplined, and involve yourself in the struggle.
Said Brother Akko?
You do have time for one more piece?
No, we're out of time.
Oh, okay.
It's 12 o'clock.
Well, I'll put it out there anyway. The last article I wanted to read was about the NGOs. An article out of Venezuela. Amnesty International defends U.S. regime change NGOs in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. And so I wanted to share that because these NGOs are becoming very prominent in the Caribbean. And everybody wants to form an NGO, forgetting that, which we discussed on XTV before, that the modern NGO was an initiative of Robert McNamara, the former U.S. Secretary of Defense, and the main architect of the Vietnam War, one of the main architects of the Vietnam War, who saw soft power as a way to advance U.S. interest. And so the modern NGO emerged from that particular perspective. So it is no surprise that NGOs are now used as Trojan horses to undermine progressive movements and promote U.S. policy.
I pick up the terminology. They're near government organizations. They're near to government, near to the policy, and near to the bag of money. And as we can see in Belize's case with the environmental NGO as a collective, them absolutely silent leading up to the NEAC review of the EIA for the proposed cruise and cargo ports, deathly silence. And then now they come out with, they have a whole lot to say now after the fact. That's what I got for telling. Well, we want to definitely thank our sister Tamanisha J, Dr. Tamanisha J from York University in Canada. Caribbean parents, hear the accent, so you can't just run the accent, she just the talk, you can't just have the accent, but give thanks for her willingness to speak courageously and with knowledge in analyzing Caribbean news story. Big up brother Mutota, our revolutionary from one of the Trinidad and Tobago. Definitely want to thank with security guard Brother Shane Flowers here at XTV. We have our Master Chief Operator, Technical Director, Sister Krista Flowers, young, beautiful, knowledgeable sister, and Kirsty Mommy. And then downstairs in Creme Radio, we have Larry Guerrero, known as Larry G. This show will repeat at 5:30 Belize time. You could always go to XTV Belize Facebook page and YouTube for listening to the conversations at any time, and we encourage you to share the link. Until next Sunday, Sister Dr. Tamanisha J, Brother Mutota, have one peaceful Sunday. And remember, say, only organized people want to save the people.
Yes. Thank you.
Nobody do it to no Guatemala. This time me name is Pupa. Belize me come from the Belize City area. 110% Belize and proud of it. Don't tell me about maritime area. Long time ago agreement by the slave master. Talking about the head on the Belize and dollar because patriots. All people who love them country bad love them homeland. Will never give it up to another nation. Them country bad love them homeland.